Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler episode 609. Today the Amateur Traveler talks about very tall buildings, maglev trains, colonial history, and gardens from the Ming Dynasty as we go to Shanghai, China. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. With no further ado, let's talk about Shanghai. I'd like to welcome to the show Carissa, who is an American living in Shanghai and has come to talk to us about Shanghai, China. Carissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Carissa pitched me on Shanghai. We have talked about Shanghai in the show, but it's been a long, long time. So it was time to do it again. Shanghai is one of those cities that changes a bit in between time, too. What brought you to Shanghai?
My husband has a job here. He is a mechanical engineering professor at a university. So we've lived here for the past 5.5 years, and he's been working, and I've had 2 kids while here, and they're in local schools, so we've really tried to kind of learn the culture and the language as much as we can and get the good cross-cultural experience.
And how much do your kids know much more Chinese than you know?
Right now, my 7-year-old, who's in 1st grade, his accent is, of course, way better than mine, and his writing is getting better than mine. Not sure about his vocabulary, but it'll be there very soon. Yeah, we're jealous.
Excellent. So why should someone think about going to Shanghai in China?
It's world famous, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when people come to China, they often go to Beijing and Xi'an maybe and a few other places. And sometimes they skip Shanghai. But I just want to pitch it as unique as a city in China because it is so modern, not as historical as some of the other cities, although it still has its share of history. It's ultra modern. It kind of gives you a picture of China of the future, maybe Asia of the future. I really like the history of like the early 20th century where it was known as the Paris of the East. So it's a little bit of more modern Chinese history, but it was very unique and international, even in that time when the rest of China was still a little more closed off to the West. So I just think it's unique and it has a lot to do and something for everyone.
Excellent. And what do you recommend we do when we go to Shanghai?
Well, I would recommend for people coming that they start by heading to Pudong. So Shanghai has half the city is west of the river and half the city is east of the river. So Pudong is kind of the new city, and it is Dong means east, so it's east of the river, and it includes the whole area that you generally see as the Shanghai skyline. If you see any pictures, postcards, whatever, that's all Pudong, an area called Lujiazui. So in there, I'm recommending going there first because over there's the Pearl Tower, which is kind of the iconic tower with the ball on the top that is in every picture. And I don't recommend going up the Pearl Tower. If you really want to, you can, but it's kind of a lot of money and you might have to spend a long time waiting in line depending on how crowded it is. And there are other places to see a better skyline view. But in the bottom of that tower is a Shanghai History Museum. And we kind of stumbled across it a few years ago. My parents were visiting and we were touring them around. And we saw the Shanghai History Museum, and I had never heard of it, but we decided to check it out. And there was no line. When at that time it was a holiday, so there was actually a 6-hour line to wait to get up to the top of the Pearl Tower. So we skipped that and went to the bottom where there was no line, and it was quite cheap. I think it was only like $1 or $2. And it turned out to be a really interesting museum. And we had my son with me, and he was actually quite engaged as well because it was pretty interactive. And it just gives a good overview of the history of Shanghai from hundreds of years ago when it was just kind of a little village to when all the foreigners started coming in and how all that happened, and then into the modern day. And of course, like any Chinese museum, it is presented very much from the Chinese perspective, but it's still, I think, worth starting out there. So you kind of have a sense of what Shanghai is and the history of it, and then you could kind of from there launch into, I want to go check this area of the city out a little more over the next few days.
Now, as I recall, at the base of that tower, there's a building shaped like a globe. Are we right next door to that, or?
This is in the basement of the actual tower.
Oh,
I think the globe-shaped building might be right next to the tower.
Got it. Okay.
If I'm thinking
I
of
think
the
you
same
were correct.
one. Yeah, so this is actually, you go in the tower, but you go down and there should be signs. I think there's some in English that say like the History Museum is this way, so make sure you don't get in the line to go to the top of the tower.
Okay.
That museum would take at most half a day, and so you can spend the rest of that day. It's very close to some of there are 3 really tall towers right down there. So if you want to get a good skyline view, you can go to the top of one of those. The tallest one, of course, is the new Shanghai Tower, which is the tallest in China, and for a brief period of time, I believe it's the tallest in the world until the one in Dubai took over. But it's 120 floors, I think, and you can go to the 118th floor. Then there's a Jinmao Tower that's about 88 floors, and you can either go to the 88th floor and pay money, or you can, if you're there in the evening, you can actually go to a club restaurant type place that's on the 87th floor, and you pay like 150 RMB to get in, which 150 RMB is like $20-ish, depending on when you come.
RMB to the dollar is 6 or 8. What is the exchange rate?
It's about 6.2, 6.3 right now.
All right, great.
So you can pay that money, but then you use that money to buy drinks or food or whatever in there. So I actually recommend that is the nicest skyline experience, is to go if you're there in the evening and you want to spend some time hanging out and drinking drinks, eating dessert or little snacks or whatever. That's a really nice place. So that's in the Jinmao Tower. And then there's another Shanghai Financial Tower, I think, that you can also go up in. So you could do those first 2 things and just walk around a little bit in that area for the first day. And I think that's a good launching off place.
When you mentioned Pudong, a lot of people will actually be flying into Pudong now because it has the newer airport in Shanghai.
Right.
So you may actually be flying into that part of town. It used to be that the only airport was way out the other way.
To the west, yes. You will 90% chance to be flying into the Pudong airport. Well, you can take a subway from the airport into that area of the city. And that subway at least going in one direction is where you can ride the maglev if you want to pay money and get that experience, like the fastest train in the world. We've never done that because it's quite a bit of money and it's only about a 5-minute experience. But if you want to come do that as a tourist, that goes from the downtown Pudong to the airport. Part of that, you can get off the subway and go to the maglev. From the airport to this downtown area is still probably at least 30 to 40 minutes, either by subway or taxi. So it's not like you get out of the airport and walk right there, but it's closer than other parts of town. Yeah, so then maybe the second day, you might want to go to the Puxi area, to some of the main areas that most tourists know of Shanghai. There's a pretty big difference you'll notice between Pudong and Puxi because Pudong is so much newer. But walking around downtown, you won't get as much of a kind of the cultural vibe. And
Puxi is just the area on the west side of the river?
Yes, right.
The whole rest of the city is that?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
It's much more populated and older. And people just tend to feel like it has a little more character, a little more of a nice downtown vibe. So if you want to stay somewhere, you might want to stay in the Puxi area somewhere. But in that area, as far as tourist spots, one of the most famous is called the Bund. And it is just kind of a walkway along the river where you get a good view of the skyline across the river in Pudong. So you can kind of look over to where you might have gone the previous day, and there's not a whole lot to do there other than just kind of walk along. There's some restaurants in that area, but if you just want to walk along the Bund, it's an hour at most. Take some pictures. There are river cruises you can do that would start somewhere along the Bund. So you can check out one of those if you're really interested. But most people just walk there. And then pretty close to there, you can walk or you could take a short subway ride is the Yuyuan Gardens. It's an area that's very good if you want to do any tourist shopping. There are a lot of little stalls and the kinds of trinkets and souvenirs that you would want to buy from Shanghai. You can find them all down there and make sure that you bargain for them as much as you can. If you go in the gardens, there's a nice Chinese garden. I would say if you're a person who has been to a Chinese garden elsewhere in China, if this is part of a bigger trip, or if you've been here before, it's not necessary to go into the actual garden. You have to pay some money, and it's just your standard Chinese garden. But if you haven't done a Chinese garden before, it's nice. It's usually not too crowded and pretty tranquil, and you get a feel for what Chinese gardens are like and their unique style. But then outside the garden, there's a pond, I think, going through, and there's a bunch of stalls for tourist shopping, and then there's a crooked bridge that you can cross, and that will generally be quite crowded getting across the bridge because that's kind of what everybody wants to do. But it's a good place for taking pictures. And the crooked bridge idea is something that's pretty common in China because I think the belief was if the bridge is crooked, then the bad spirits can't get across so easily. So a lot of historical Chinese gardens and places will have these crooked bridges, but this is probably one of the most famous.
Well, and you say historical, and so we're talking about the gardens are from the 1500s, from the Ming Dynasty. And one of the only things you'll see in the city, there aren't that many things in the city that are old. This is a new city.
Right.
The Bund being more from the colonial period, so buildings on the right, then the Bund being from the 1920s to 40s, I would say, probably 1930s or so.
Yes. The Yuyuan Gardens is definitely the most historic if you're talking about older history in Shanghai. So it's unique for that. Of course, I'm sure it's all been rebuilt most of it since then. There's also some nice restaurants in that area and there's some places that are like cafeteria style where you can try a bunch of different special Shanghainese or Chinese foods, like some of their different kinds of dumplings and stuff. And there's a Starbucks in there and a few other Western style places. So, and then from there, pretty close by is an area called People's Square, which is just kind of a big square. You can park, I guess. You can walk around, and it's right outside of a subway stop, so it's pretty convenient to get to. And then you can walk from there also to Nanjing Xilu, which is just a big shopping street, very broad. If you go during a holiday or anything, it's going to be wall-to-wall people, which is kind of a good cultural Chinese experience. But if you go during the day on a weekday or something, you can walk down and there's a lot of very fancy shopping you can do since Shanghai is historically the fashion capital of China. This is kind of be like the fashion center, more expensive restaurants, that kind of thing. So those are all pretty close to each other.
Now, it's been a few years since I've been to Shanghai. Am I still going to get the opportunity to buy a Rolex watch from somebody approaching me on the street on Nanjing Road?
I haven't seen Rolex watches in a while. Yeah, I think they've really cracked down a bit on the fake brand name thing.
Fake?
Well, on the brand name things being sold for super cheap on the street.
Sure.
You'll still probably find it some places, but maybe not in the main downtown places.
Okay.
I think in general, Chinese people have really moved away from wanting that stuff as much. They realize that it's kind of given them a bad name in some ways. But if you're really wanting that, I'm sure you can find it somewhere in the city.
It wasn't so much that we were looking for it. It was just every few feet we were being offered it.
Now you'll be offered, if you have kids with you, you'll be offered like dinky little toys for them that light up and stuff. If you don't, there's all kinds of other things where you'll have like the same exact product being offered to you like every 5 minutes as you walk down.
Okay.
They usually know a few important words in English.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and for bargaining and stuff in general, it's worth trying to learn the Chinese hand signs for the numbers 1 through 10. But if you don't, they'll usually have a calculator or paper and you can write it down. So you can bargain pretty effectively if they don't speak any English, which many don't. Yeah, so from there, maybe the third day or the next thing you might want to do is an area around the French concession, the former French concession in Shanghai, which if you go to the Shanghai History Museum, there's a section in there that talks about there used to be concessions for all the different nationalities of Europeans that were kind of colonizing China. The only one I think that's really still known now as an area in Shanghai is the former French concession. And it's a really nice area just to walk around. I think it's probably my favorite area of the city if we just want to go downtown. I should say we live about an hour south of the main area of the city in what would be considered suburbs if you were in the U.S., but here is still part of Shanghai. So when we go downtown, we often like to take the subway and go to this French concession area if we're craving good Western food or something.
And I'm trying to put that on a map. It is north of the Nanjing Road area? It's
west and I believe a little bit south.
Okay.
So
okay.
Southwest.
Then I had in the wrong place.
If you do the subway, it's along line 1 is a line to take to get to that area.
Okay.
Although I think some other lines go there too. There's a park down there called Fuxing Park, Fuxing, that is nice. I recommend if you don't choose this park, you can choose another park in Shanghai, but taking at least some time to walk around in a park in China, because there's a very specific Chinese park culture, I'd say, where you'll see old people out doing their exercises, or if you're there in the evening, you might see a group of older ladies dancing to some music in a square somewhere. Or sometimes you'll come across a little kids play area that's more than just a playground. It's got like carnival rides or something. You're like, whoa, what is this? So it's kind of fun just to walk around, and they're usually very pretty and tranquil. So one of the bigger ones is this Fuxing Park in the French concession. So that's a good one to walk around for a while and enjoy it, feel like you're getting some natural beauty. And then there's an area called Tianzifang that's also, I believe it's pretty close to the Fuxing Park, to one of the entrances of the Fuxing Park. And it's one of the historical things in Shanghai, which is still relatively modern history for China, but it's an architecture style called Shikumen, where people used to live in these houses before they started building the high-rise apartment buildings. It was just alleys with these houses that were all quite small, but just lined up. And then there'd be small little alleys between them. So this is one of the areas where that architecture is still preserved. Most of it has been torn down, of course, across Shanghai, but this area still has it preserved. And you can walk around. There's all these alleys you can kind of get lost in. It's an area where no cars can go in. And there's a lot of little stalls selling touristy stuff, but also there's some art galleries and a lot of restaurants. So we like to just walk around and kind of get lost in there and then maybe get a meal and look in some of the art galleries. But it's a really picturesque and just kind of peaceful area to go. So that's called Tianzifang.
Well, you talked about walking
Uh-huh.
around. We ought to address the issue of safety. Not that there is an
Mm.
issue of safety, but we ought to just bring this up just because I don't know whether
Yes.
people know this or not. But we're talking about a
Yes.
very large city. How many million people
20
in
million.
20 million
Yeah,
people in
around 20
Shanghai?
million.
But you mentioned walking around, and I'm
Hmm.
guessing you feel very safe walking around.
Yes, I feel safer in Shanghai than almost any city in America.
Okay.
I mean, you should be careful of pickpocketing, those kind of things.
Sure.
We've never had it happen to us, but I've had friends that had like their phone stolen out of their pocket or something. But that's about the worst that you would get. I think the police
Hmm.
are quite strict here. And in general, China is just very safe if you're talking about
Hmm.
crime, very low crime rate. So even if you're out late at night as a single woman or something, you really don't need to worry about it too much.
And I just wanted to make sure we said that because I don't want to assume that everybody knows that.
Yes.
And then getting around, you've talked about getting around on the subway, which I'm assuming is definitely one of the ways that you're recommending we get around. Is that the best way to get around, or do you use other means of transportation? I'm assuming we're not renting a car.
Right. No, I would not recommend renting a car. You can, but that's going to be a lot more stress than is necessary. I think Shanghai has one of the most, if not the most extensive subway system in the world. So if you're getting around downtown, the subway is quite convenient. You can also do taxis. They're relatively cheap compared to in the West. If you're a foreigner coming to visit, your issue is going to be communicating with the taxi driver.
Right. That's what I wanted to get to.
The subways, you don't generally need to communicate with anyone. And if you just like download the subway app map or something, it's pretty easy to figure out. For taxis, if you don't speak any Chinese, generally if you're staying in the hotels that are foreigner friendly that you're going to find on like booking.com or whatever, there should be someone who can speak some English in the hotel, and they can help you call taxis to get to where you want, and they can tell the taxi driver where you want to go.
Well, or write it down on something that you can hand to someone, right?
Yes, they can write it down in Chinese characters, and you can hand that to the taxi driver. And then if you're trying to get back to the hotel, you can usually get just a card from the hotel and try to flag down a taxi driver and get there.
Right.
Taxi drivers are very friendly here, and they're usually wanting to help you. And they're generally, if you get one of the taxi companies where the taxi actually looks like a taxi and is not what we call a black's taxi, where it's just somebody's car that they're trying to get you to go in and charge whatever amount of money since you're a foreigner.
Right.
Don't get those. But if you get one of the ones that looks like a taxi, they're very trustworthy. We've never had them try to give us the runaround or anything, but they don't speak English.
Right.
I don't think we've ever had one that speaks English.
Yeah, that's what I was running into.
Yes. It's not like Thailand or some of the other. You want to have your address written down. If you're willing to go for the adventure, it's usually, you'll be safe and you'll probably eventually get to where you want to go.
Well, I was finding when I was going someplace simple downtown that wasn't that far, that I was spending no more than $2 on a cab. It was pretty cheap.
Yeah, the price may have gone up a little bit, but it's still quite cheap.
And I remember very confidently, though, walking into a cab with two coworkers on one trip that I was there and saying the Marriott and having just the look like I have no idea what you're talking about, just none whatsoever. And fortunately, we were staying at the Marriott Tomorrow Square, and I knew enough Chinese to get out tomorrow, and then he knew what I was talking about. It was right by the Shanghai Museum. You could practically see it from where I was because I was close by, and it's a rocket ship shaped building, so I could have pointed at it if I could have seen it.
Right,
But if I'd had the card, if I'd remembered to take the card from the front desk where they always have them, it would not have been a problem. But for a moment, it looked like we were going to have to walk. Yeah.
Try to grab one of those when you first get there.
And then Uber or something like that present in Shanghai now?
Uber was here for a few years and now it's gone.
Okay.
I think it got bought by a Chinese company.
Okay.
Or the Chinese Uber got bought by a Chinese company that was basically doing the same thing but doing it much better for the Chinese market. So you can download an app called Didi, D-I-D-I, and there's an English version of that app now. And you can use it to call taxis, and you can even enter the address where you want to go in Pinyin, which most names of roads and stuff, the name of the road is the Pinyin. it's just sometimes tricky actually
And when
finding
you
the
say
right
that,
place.
that is to take a Chinese word and to write it in
Yes,
English characters.
yes. So when I say like Pudong, the pinyin is Pudong.
Right.
Road names, those kind of things, the English that you know is the pinyin.
And Didi, the name of the app, Little Brother?
It's the same as little brother, but the Chinese characters are different.
Okay, got it.
So it doesn't mean the
Same sound,
the
not
same
different
thing,
characters.
but
Yep.
yes. Yeah, so you can try that. And I think we had an American friend come and download it. He was just having trouble like actually finding the right address, but it's worth giving it a try. And if you have a Chinese person at a hotel or something that can help you make sure that you're getting the right address put in, then that way the driver who comes and picks you up will already have the address put in and they will just follow the GPS to get there. So it works quite well. And then you can pay them. If you're Chinese, you would pay them through the app, but you can also pay them in cash. So, but I recommend if you can do the subway, that's just going to be a lot more simple.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to take some side trips a little bit outside of the city, but not far enough away that you're taking the train, then you would probably want to book a taxi, and your hotel should be able to help you with that. And you could even arrange with a taxi driver, like if you're going somewhere for the day, to have him come pick you back up at a certain time.
Got it.
Just want somebody who can speak Chinese to be able to talk to the driver about that.
Well, and if you're interested in side trips that are a little further afield, we actually have an episode on 3 kind of weekend trips from Shanghai. That would be getting on a train, basically.
Yes. And the train is also excellent here. The high-speed train is super fast and quite nice, even if you buy second-class tickets. And for a little closer kind of day trips within Shanghai or right outside, there are a few water towns around Shanghai that are quite nice to go for the day. I think all of them you would probably need a taxi to get to. I don't think a subway goes to any of the bigger ones. One of those that we have gone to a few times is called Zhujiajiao. So that is a water town that is pretty close to the city, but probably if you're staying downtown, it's probably 45 minutes taxi ride to get there. And water towns in China, people might say, compare them to Venice or something, but it's definitely a very Chinese flavor of that. But it'll be an ancient town, like an older town that's built along a canal. And you can take boats that there's a driver. They're usually standing up and paddling with these big long paddles or pushing off the bottom of the canal. You can take one of those up and down or around this town, depending on how big it is. But you can also walk along the sides of the canal, and there's usually a lot of restaurants with good Chinese food and little shops and just a nice atmosphere. And then there'll be some little gardens around, that kind of thing. So that's a nice day.
Well, and I think 2 of the trips that we recommended that were a little further afield were Suzhou and Hangzhou, which are also basically water towns.
Suzhou especially has some areas like that. Hangzhou, most people go around the lake, the West Lake, which has some similar scenery and stuff.
Right.
If you're not able to take the time to go to those, each of those you could do in a day as well, because the train is so convenient. If you get up and leave early in the morning and then come back late at night, you can do those in a day, or you can visit. There's other water towns that are a little closer. Those are both their own cities in their own right in different provinces from Shanghai. There's a few that are within Shanghai limits as well. And then other things that you can do in Shanghai, there are some good museums. You mentioned the Shanghai Museum. There's some botanical gardens that are nice. There are a lot of places where you'll see beautiful flowers if you come in the spring. Shanghai was where a lot of the Communist Party history took place, where they were meeting to plan it and start founding it and stuff. So there are some different museums that are like different people's houses, or a place where they were doing a lot of the planning and meetings and stuff. There are a few, those are usually pretty small museums, but a few of those you can visit. There's also the TV Song and his 3 daughters, who are famous in early 20th century Chinese history because the father himself, I think his first name was actually Charlie, but everybody calls him TV Song. He was a very rich businessman, and I think he made his wealth by selling Bibles or something like that. And then his 3 daughters each married important people in that season of history. So one married Sun Yat-sen, who was the founder of when China first became a republic and threw off the dynastical rule. the
Mm-hmm.
Qing dynasty. He was kind of the leader of that. And then one married Chiang Kai-shek,
Oh,
who
wow.
then went on to Taiwan
Okay.
and all that. And then one married H.H. Kong, I think, who was a Chinese premier.
Hmm.
So the three daughters, that family's residence was in Shanghai, so you can go visit where they lived. And one of their houses has been turned into a nice Western restaurant down in the French concession area. So you can go have a meal and be eating in this old house. And then if you have kids, there are a lot of things to do with kids in Shanghai. There's a wild animal park over in Pudong where you can kind of take a little safari ride
Oh.
and see tigers and lions and stuff. I recommend it more highly than the Shanghai Zoo. Around Shanghai, there's a lot of malls that often have indoor kids play places.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is kind of a unique thing to China and maybe Asia to a certain extent, but our kids love those, and it's a good place to observe Chinese families and Chinese parenting style if you're interested in that.
Okay.
But it'll be a kind of place where you pay a fee and then your kids can go in and there'll be all these slides and big climbing things and stuff that they can play in. And especially if the weather is rainy or super hot, those are good places to expend some energy if you come here with kids.
Well, and you mentioned the weather. When is a good time to go to Shanghai, and when would you avoid if you had the choice?
Best weather times are definitely spring and fall.
Okay.
Spring being from like early March through, I would say your best bet is through mid-May, because from mid-May to mid-June here is called the plum rain season.
Okay.
So it can be quite rainy. But when it's not raining, the weather should be nice. So it's still okay. Then from mid-June through end of August is summer and is very hot. It's a fine time to come, but you need to be willing to be hot and sweaty if you're outside. Winter, temperature-wise, it's not that cold, but if you're here walking around outside, I think because it's more humid here, you just tend to feel the cold a little bit more. So if you come in the winter, it'll be less crowded probably if you're going to tourist stuff, but you might think, especially if you're from like a cold place in the US, you might think, oh, the temperature is not that cold, I don't need to bundle up that much. But I recommend actually bringing long underwear and a good coat and hat and scarf and everything, because you will feel cold walking around. I also would recommend making sure you avoid any big Chinese holidays, because it will just be a lot more crowded.
Golden Week, for instance.
Yes, October 1st through 7th is the Chinese National Day, and that's when I mentioned we went downtown and there was a 6-hour line to get up the Pearl Tower.
Oh my, okay.
So that's the week when everybody travels. Everybody in China has it off and everybody travels. If you come during Chinese New Year, it won't be super crowded downtown because most people are going to their hometowns, but some things might be closed down.
Okay.
Some museums might not be open and stuff if you come during the Chinese New Year week, but it might be cheaper in hotels and stuff, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would also try and avoid Golden Week in terms of trying to book a train ticket or during those time periods.
Oh, yeah.
Is not a great time to be trying to move around in China too, because the trains and flights will be full.
Totally packed, yes.
Or at least if you're going to do it ahead of time.
There are a few other weekend holidays in China that are just like a 3-day weekend that can be a little bit more crowded. If you're only coming for a few days, just make sure you have some time that's not on a holiday weekend. But spring and fall, if you can swing it, are the nicest weather times.
Excellent. Other places we want to talk about going to?
Oh, I didn't mention in the French concession, if you are here and you're craving Western food or some Western style nightlife, there's a road called Hengshan Road. And there's a subway stop on line 1 that's called the Hengshan Road subway stop. So you can just get off there. And there's a road that has the nice architecture, French concession architecture, which has a lot of trees hanging over the road and some brick sidewalks and stuff that it's just picturesque. And then there are a lot of like bars and Western style restaurants around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing that's going to surprise me when I come to Shanghai the first time.
For me, I still am just constantly amazed trying to comprehend the size of it, the 20 million people. And it is very big space-wise as well. Just the fact that we live an hour south of all those areas I was talking about, an hour by taxi and maybe more than an hour by subway, depending on where you're going. And yet we're still in Shanghai, and there's still more further south of us. It goes all the way to the coast, and there's an island there called Chongming Island. Actually, that would be a good day trip for people as well, to go to Chongming Island if you want to see some coast. And there's some national forest park and some things like that. And then if you go all the way to the north of Shanghai, I'm guessing it would take you at least 3 hours to drive like from north to south of the city limits. And then you just drive downtown, and the constant high rises are just crazy to think about the number of people there. And our complex where we live is, I think we calculated at one point, is could be like 10,000 people just in our complex.
Okay.
And that's a very normal size complex. So it's the size of a lot of small towns. And Shanghai itself is the size of many countries, population-wise. Coming from the West, that is just hard to imagine, hard to think about. I think another thing that could surprise Westerners is you'll be walking around in these super ultra-modern areas, but then you still see people that look very much, I don't know, like a little bit more poor, lower economic level, or you'll just see these little dirty hole in the walls that just looks like you're in some less developed town, I guess. So that contrast, which is something you see in most big cities in Asia, but if you're coming from the West, it can still be, and maybe you're coming thinking Shanghai is going to be different because it's a modern city, but it's still got that very Chinese flavor. And you will still see the little stalls selling all kinds of little street foods and weird items that you don't know why there's a store selling them and all those kind of things. So
like
that can be surprising.
What sort of weird items?
Like there might be a stationery store that you go in and has all these cheap little made in China toys and then fancy paints. And I guess more that the weird aspect is that there's so many different things in this little store. A lot of little cheap Chinese toys that you didn't know existed. Probably.
And we mentioned food a couple times, but we haven't talked about specifically what should I remember to order when I'm in Shanghai, either street food or from a restaurant.
Yeah, if you're willing, I definitely recommend trying some street foods. We tend to like the kind of hole-in-the-wall, less fancy Chinese restaurants, as opposed to if you go to fancy banquet-style dinners, you get all the really strange, like eel and a lot of the foods that are a little harder for Westerners to appreciate. Just a standard little Chinese restaurant, you're going to get a lot of good food if you can find one with pictures on the menu. But a few of the well-known foods in Shanghai, there's a kind of dumpling called xiaolongbao that are little soup-filled dumplings that are famous from their Shanghainese thing. They're very good, and you should be able to buy them. And there should be a lot of restaurants that mostly specialize in those, especially if you're like in the downtown areas. There's another kind of dumpling called shengjian. The inside is rice with some meat mixed in. And there's a chain called Yang's Dumplings that is around here. I don't know how far it spreads in China, but they have quite good shengjian and some other kind of dumplings too. And the name is written in English, Yang's Dumplings, so it should be easy to find. Another dish that is a special Shanghainese thing is called hongshaorou, red braised pork.
Okay.
And it's like pork belly that usually has a good amount of fat on it, chunks of it basically stewed in a red, sweet, sticky sauce. So it's quite good if you can get a good version of it, which most standard restaurants around here will have some. If you're willing to eat the pork belly with its fat, it's really good. And Shanghainese food is known for being a little bit sweet and rich compared to other parts of China. So
okay. The other thing I would say about finding a restaurant with pictures is I remember we were on Nanjing Road, only like a block from the Apple store, so very far downtown, close to the Bund. And there was a restaurant that had an English menu, but it was really more of a Chinglish menu. It was translated by someone who really didn't know English, and so the pictures were very helpful because just go to Amateur Traveler. If you want something entertaining, go to amateurtraveler.com and search for Chinglish menu. And this had things like fried twice with no effect, and one of them was
Yes.
decayed meat,
Oh, wow.
which was supposed to be aged beef. So it was
Right.
useful to have the
Yes.
pictures. It's like, well, I think that's Kung Pao chicken, or
Yeah, it's quite entertaining to read the menus here. I think they usually just put in the Chinese into Google, or not Google Translate, but their version of it,
yep.
and put in whatever comes up. So it can be pretty entertaining. The best way to eat Chinese food is if you can somehow have a Chinese friend
Yep.
or a local who can take you to a restaurant and order for you. We still, after living here 5 years, if we go to a new restaurant, we still sometimes just struggle to know what's good there and how, yeah, because every menu is usually pages and pages long. So
Right.
to actually find what that restaurant has that's good can be challenging, but you can do it. And if you know a few dishes to look out for, just try to order those.
Okay.
And then street food is usually, you know exactly what they're cooking because you see it right there.
Well,
Yeah.
you mentioned that sometimes they use the translation program. I don't know if we've mentioned on this show, but there was an unfortunate incident that happened during the Beijing Olympics where someone wanted to greet their new customers who were coming in for the Olympics, and so they put a English banner outside their store. They went to the trouble of buying a banner that was, I think, 20 feet long or something like this in front of the banner.
Oh, wow.
And they had gone to some translation program, and they'd probably put a banner in front of their store that said, "Translation program not available. Please try again later." I swear it's true.
I haven't heard that.
I
That's
have
hilarious.
seen the picture.
That's really funny.
I blame the programmer in that one. That error message
Yeah,
should have
yeah.
been in the original language, not in the source, not in the destination
Yeah, for
language.
sure.
But that is
Wow.
not the merchant's fault.
No.
Excellent. Well, let's get to some of our last wrap-up questions here. You're
Okay.
standing in the prettiest spot in Shanghai. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
I would say probably somewhere in the French concession, maybe
okay.
along Hengshanlu or one of the roads right near there where there's kind of the weeping willow kind of trees hanging
Okay.
over the street and some nicer, slightly older looking, but well-preserved architecture on both sides. You still feel like you're in the city, but it's a pretty area of the city.
Okay. I would have put good money you were standing on the bund looking at Pudong, but okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's also nice, but
Yep.
it's on every postcard, and I
It
don't know if I would
is.
say
It is.
pretty. It's impressive.
Okay. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Shanghai.
Walking downtown and you find some square and there's a bunch of maybe like 50 middle-aged to older ladies playing
Mahjong?
some Korean pop, K-pop,
Oh, okay.
something like that, and dancing all together. That's really fun.
I didn't think that's where you were going
can
with
join in
that.
if you're really brave. Just try to follow along and they will love you forever.
That's awesome. One phrase of Chinese that you ought to learn.
厕所在哪里, which means where is the bathroom? Or if you just want to say hello, say 你好.
Ni hao.
People will often, you'll just say 你好 and they'll say, in Chinese, they'll say, wow, your Chinese is so good.
The other phrase, and I don't know if we've told the story on the show before, but when we went there on a tour, our son kept having people come up to him and selling him their Rolex watches or whatever, and he would say no, and they would didn't make them go away. And so he learned how to say it in Chinese. He learned how to say 不要.
Yes.
And it was really funny. The first time he went to use it, no, 不要. And the person literally went, oh, 不要, and walked away.
Yeah, that is helpful because then they will think, oh, this person knows a little bit about China and isn't just a totally innocent tourist.
Right.
So say, yeah, 不要.
Which was completely
Or if you
fake. But
Right.
that was
But
a
it
useful
works.
phrase to know. Excellent.
Yes, and Chinese people love if you try to speak Chinese, so you don't need to be afraid of having a bad accent or anything.
One last question, which is, if you had to summarize Shanghai in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Massive,
Yep.
modern, and fast-paced.
Oh, sure. Excellent. Carissa, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for your adopted hometown of Shanghai.
Yes, thanks for having me, and I hope more people will come and appreciate this city.
In News of the Community, I heard from Jeff again about the episode we did on Denmark recently. Another memorable episode taking me back to my youth. My great-grandfather came from Denmark. What always makes me smile is the mention of Legoland. In 1977, my parents would not take me to Legoland. We went to Rebild National Park instead. Rebild is Denmark's first national park. It is a memorial to Danish Americans and includes a replica of Abraham Lincoln's log cabin. I always felt cheated. Needless to say, I got to go to Legoland in California some 20 years later. Thanks, Jeff. I also heard from Patrick, who said, "Hey, Chris, the show rocks. I listen on my commute every day. I've been working in China for almost 6 years now, so I especially love the China episodes." So, Patrick, this one's for you. You and Jessica spent a minute discussing tools and resources that make it easier to travel in China. That's Jessica, who did the Chengdu episode. I wanted to add Apple Maps to those resources for any future travelers. You can use it all in English, and you can even use the public transit option on it if you want to avoid taxis. I've been to some small and out-of-the-way cities, and Apple Maps has never failed me. Apple has done such a good job with it that I will stick exclusively with iPhones as long as I'm here. And again, that came as a surprise to me because Google Maps tends to have a better reputation, but good to know. And another great app for China is the Trip.com app. I thought it worth mentioning as I listened to this Xi'an episode. Again, it's in English, and you can look up the train route you want, choose the train you want, and show the people at the ticket office to make it a little easier. I hope this helps some people visiting China in the future. Patrick. Thanks, Patrick. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. I should say that does seem to be 2 rooms available for the Amateur Traveler Central Europe trip in September of 2018 to Prague, Krakow, and Budapest. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
Got to see one more cathedral.